Beyond the Crime, Healing, Education, and Criminal Justice Reform, featuring Ranae Van Roekel. In this episode of the Talking Addiction Recovery podcast, we sit down with Ranae Van Roekel, a former federal inmate turned advocate for criminal justice reform and trauma-informed care. Ranae shares her powerful journey from committing a federal crime to finding healing and purpose during incarceration. She speaks candidly about how trauma, addiction, and unaddressed pain shaped her decisions, and how prison became the unexpected space where she began confronting her past and rebuilding her future. Now, the founder of Connecting to Cope, Ranae works to raise awareness about the deeper factors that led to incarceration and the critical need for trauma-informed education both inside and outside correctional settings. This conversation explores why understanding the why matters more than focusing only on the what, the role of education in reducing recidivism, gaps in re-entry coordination and support, trauma treatment in incarceration settings, and why compassion and second chances are essential. This episode is a reminder that people are more than their worst decision and that meaningful reform begins with understanding.
This is Talking Addiction and Recovery, the podcast talking, you guessed it, all about addiction and recovery. Join your host, licensed professional counselor Andrew J. Schreier, as he and his guests break down recovery topics with raw honesty, delving into niche conversations around the topics of substance abuse, mental health, and gambling. We intend to meet individuals where they are on their own personal journey of recovery, with dignity, respect, and compassion. We'll do more than talk addiction and recovery. We'll explore it. We're glad you've joined us. Here with today's episode, your host, Andrew Schreier.
A mother, grandmother, wife, and advocate, Ranae served 36 months in federal prison, an experience that became her turning point. In confronting decades of buried trauma, she found clarity and purpose. Through Connecting to Cope, she now shares healing tools and education to help others break cycles of pain, rediscover their worth, and lead with compassion. Ranae's message resonates deeply with audiences seeking growth, wellness, second chances, and authentic leadership. Her story reminds us that influence starts with empathy and that healing isn't linear but always possible. You can learn more about Ranae and find ways to connect with her in the podcast notes. On this episode of Talking Addiction and Recovery podcast, we welcome Ranae Van Roekel to the podcast. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Andrew. I'm excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, we're going to listen and learn more about who you are, what you do, especially with Connecting to Cope. But before we dive into all that, can you give the audience a little bit of a background about yourself?
Sure, no problem. I'm a Midwest girl. I grew up in Southwest Minnesota, in a tiny little town where everybody knew everybody, and the youngest of 4 daughters. And some trauma that happened to me when I was a young girl led me to some not so great choices. But we'll get into that later. But currently I'm married. I've been married for 38 years. I have 2 sons, and so I love calling myself a mother. That's the best title I've had, besides, of course, the title of grandmother, which I am now, which is great. I started Connecting to Cope after my incarceration, and really just wanted to help people, make people more aware of what leads to incarceration. I mean, we know it's crime, right? Committing a crime obviously leads you there, but really what leads both men and women to making those choices and doing the things and, changing their lives forever. And Connecting to Cope talks a lot about that, and also talks a lot about trauma, mental health, and what you can do to overcome some of that.
Thank you for sharing that. We're going to dive into a couple of those topics that you brought up. And one of them was when you look at about who you are,
Yep.
You read through it, you talk about titles of mom, sister, daughter, wife, and one of the ones that you never expected was felon. And you
Exactly.
mentioned part of that, a history of your own. So what is it that you'd want to share with the audience about that experience, or how that title of felon applies to you or came into your story?
Again, how my crime started was basically just making poor choices. At first, what I was doing was not illegal. I had started a secondary business and just trying to get some extra cash. I had a son who played AAU basketball, and he played all over the country. Close to you, he played in Milwaukee all the time. And um, got hooked up with some people, a high school buddy, and some other people who were selling tickets. And I was selling secondary tickets on the secondary market, and got brought into a scheme where people were selling tickets that really didn't exist. I mean, a few of them did, not very many of them did. And I'm a very intelligent person and I should have seen all the signs. But because of my trauma, because of my people pleasing, because of those addictions, I just wanted to make everybody happy. And with the being able to sell those tickets, even if they weren't produced, you were making people happy at the time. And that is what led to my crime. I think a lot of my crime, in fact, I know my prosecutor told me that a lot of my crime began when I tried to fix it. If I
Mm.
just would have turned myself in immediately, said who I was with, I probably would have gotten a slap on the wrist, but being the person that I am and not wanting to embarrass myself and lead the perfect life with my two kids and my husband, I didn't want to admit that I had gotten involved in that. So I tried to fix it myself. And that's really where my crime, where my wire fraud started. That's what I got charged with, was a federal wire fraud crime. And really what led to those choices, what led to those things that I did, was not handling my trauma. And did I commit a crime because I didn't handle my trauma? No, I committed a crime because I made the choice to. But a lot of the events, a lot of my mindset helped with those choices. And that's really what I try to help people with today is, dealing with things that happen to you and trying to help you overcome the trauma that you may be suffering so you don't go down the same path.
When your lawyer told you that, or the legal counsel, it sounds like that saying of the cover up is worse than the crime. Is
Yep.
that exactly
It,
like
it
what
really
was
was. It really
being taught to
was.
you?
Yep, it
Yeah.
really was. So when I turned myself in, I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't look at myself in a mirror anymore. And I'm not saying that's a good thing. That's a really bad thing to have to deal with. And in fact, I tell people what happened to me the day I turned myself in is I woke up and I couldn't do it anymore. And in my head, I had two choices. One choice was to use my husband's gun in the closet, and that I'm not stretching that. That was one of my valid choices. And the other one was to come clean. And coming clean meant that my husband, my kids, my friends, my family would know the whole story, not just the story that, that I could tell. And so I took my computer and I went and tried to turn myself into our local prosecutor, who I was on a couple boards with, our county attorney actually. And he said, Ranae, I don't know what you did, but you did something. Take your computer, get a lawyer, and find out what's going on. And that's what I did. I got a lawyer. My lawyer helped me, and we turned ourselves into the government for what I was.
I want to ask because not knowing everything of what your experience was, I want to know prior to having that incarceration experience, also while experiencing being incarcerated, and then now afterwards and all the work that you do, are there
Yep.
moments where what your views were or beliefs about the system or about the like incarceration, like has that changed as you've gone through those, like what you thought
Oh,
about it, and then when you're there, and
oh,
then when you're there,
Andrew.
when you left, like how does that play a role? Those are
It
pretty significant experiences and how it could view and shape everything about our beliefs and stuff.
Yes. Oh, Andrew, and I know you deal, you deal with people who deal with addiction every day. That's your job, and we're so thankful that we have people that do that. And um, but where incarceration is concerned, I was, again, a small girl from a town of 561 people. Did I know people who had went to quote unquote jail? I did, but I kind of just ignored it and didn't really think much of it, and didn't think much of our Federal Bureau of Prisons, of our state and local governments, how they were run, what people went through inside. And I went through quite a long process after I turned myself in before I got charged with wire fraud. It took a lot to find a crime they could actually charge me with on the federal level. But they were looking, and they found one case of wire fraud that they could use, and that's what they charged me with. And rightfully so, it was valid, obviously. And once I got there, I could not. Well, first of all, the system to get there is just broken, and how negotiations are done, and how they decide what person gets what, and the guidelines are just yeah, it's something I talk about in advocacy all the time. But once I got to prison, first of all, I pictured myself being in a cell. I was never in a cell. I was never handcuffed. I was never arrested. I basically turned myself into a Federal Bureau of Prisons in Waseca, Minnesota, and started my journey. And you basically, while you're in prison, can lay around and do absolutely nothing if you'd like to. Um, or you can work on yourself. And I chose to work on myself. That was a choice. I told myself when I went in, I am finally going to deal with this trauma. I'm going to deal with what happened to me. I was sexually abused when I was a young girl, and I never dealt with it. I kind of swept it under the rug. My mom told me not to talk about it, um, because she told me that they would think I was bad, not the people who did it to me. And so all I heard was the word bad
Mm.
and don't talk about it. So those were the words I picked out of what she told me. And I had never faced it, never dealt with it. I had, used disassociation to get rid of it and to forget about it. And it was just in my craw all the time. And once I got in there, I used the Federal Bureau of Prisons resources to come to terms. And I got lucky because I got two of the best counselors in the FBOP. Um, but not everyone is so lucky. And also because I was what they call like a one and done. I think they knew I wanted to help myself, and so I could be a somewhat of a success story for them. And so they were really willing to help me. I worked in, my job was education and a driver, and I didn't realize that um I could drive. I mean, I could drive off the prison grounds, take people from point A to point B, all those different things I could do. I didn't realize that those things were available. But I think what I want to get at, instead of my whole story of incarceration, which would take 3 hours, more than that, what I want to get to is the lack of education of the inmates that are in prison, the lack of help that is forced upon you. And I know, you can't do counseling if it's forced upon you, right? But I am a firm believer that even if you're forced to go to a class, you're going to pick up something. Or maybe you're going to open your eyes and say, you know what, I can heal from this. I can be on the road to recovery. Um, and many people, I don't know if you've heard of RDAP. I'm sure you have because of the job that you have.
Mm-hmm.
RDAP is just a way to get a year off your sentence. Most people don't take it seriously. They follow the rules, they go forward, and that is done. And those were all things that I did not realize. And I also didn't realize that when you were in prison, you are not even a person. You are just an inventory number. And 16765 that's who I was in prison. I didn't have a name. So um those are things. They basically take away your identity, and it's hard to build that back up, but it is possible because I'm living proof. So
I'm
I don't know, did I answer
fascinated.
your question? Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think it also is an interesting, as you were sharing it, I was thinking about like how the messaging of like, hey, get through this, put this behind you. We don't want to see you back. You don't
Yep.
want to come back. And I look at it as you 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 have come back, but in a different way. Like
Yes.
here you are, you're doing advocacy, you're doing coaching, you're doing speaking about it. So it hasn't been that you did your time, put all behind you. Okay, let's just forget about this. You've chosen to now make this a part of your passion and what you do, but it's also different than coming back because you got in trouble again or because you ran into some issues. So what do you think helped create that path for you of because I think anyone would say, hey, I don't want to think I want to be the furthest away ever from all this stuff. And I think anyone would say, you know what? Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what do you think instead drove you to that passion to be like, no, I actually need to still do some work with this. I still need to make this what I do and have an impact. Any insight into what
Well,
helped you do that?
yeah, definitely. I will never be done with therapy. I will never be done with talking about my trauma, dealing with my trauma. And I think a big help to me in a form of therapy and and a great coping skill, I talk about coping skills, obviously connecting to cope, um, is the fact that when I do bring up what happened to me and then the choices that I made, I think that that is just a firm reminder of things that I don't want to go back to. Whether it be the people pleasing addiction, whether it be the, always being the yes girl and not standing up for myself when I needed to. I want to be the strong woman that I know that I am inside. And prison helped me be that person. And you hear a lot in prison that you find out who you are there because you are the only person that you have to depend on, and that is so true. And so why wouldn't I speak about a system that's broken to try to make it better for the people that are inside? Why wouldn't I speak about it so we can lower recidivism rates and help people have successful lives instead of going back to prison? And why wouldn't I speak about really what started my healing journey? And those are all things that I talk to people about. And prison might not be the next person's healing journey. It might be, inpatient therapy. It might be, reconnecting with their children. It might be reconnecting with a spouse or a friend or whatever. We don't know what starts a healing journey, right? And a road to recovery from addiction. But prison and turning myself in and then incarceration is what started mine, and it started me healing from the abuse. It started me to be able to not only forgive the people who did it to me, but to forgive myself for both what happened to me on those days as well as the choices that I made to lead me to incarceration. So yeah, it's all part of me. And even though I don't ever want to repeat it, and I hope to not, it's something I need to speak about to people so they can know that you can pull yourself up and, get out of anything if you put the work in. And that's something that I truly believe.
I imagine if we ask people, what do you think's broken about the system, we wouldn't be short of responses, right? Like if we
Oh,
asked,
if you put that out there, you would have thousands of responses. Yes.
yeah, yeah. So if we were speaking to an audience, if we had, anything where we could ask people, hey, we're gonna pose this question and ask people, hey, what do you think is broken with the system or what doesn't work? Like, I don't think we would have a shortage of answers. So I want to ask a different question of you is what have you seen work or what have you seen that helps to make changes in a broken system? Because I think we hear a lot about some things that are broken, they're not
Yep.
working, but I also know that there is a lot of work being done. There are people like you who are not just speaking, not just coaching, but who are doing advocacy, which is
Yep.
to, you know, commit to change, to try and get systems to improve. So I'm curious through your services, what you do, or through what you've been, your experiences, what have you seen that does help make change or help move, even if it's one step or one action? What have you seen that actually does help towards creating a better system for those who are incarcerated?
It's really one word, but that one word takes so many different focuses when we talk about it, and that's education. And that's education for the people on the outside to understand what people are going through on the inside. That's one of them. Education for people who are incarcerated. What are they going to do when they get out of prison? What are they going to do to make money instead of selling drugs on the street corner or gambling and hope that they win, the next big pot or getting into financial crimes like I did. It's education also to deal with what brought you to prison. Why are you there? Yes, again, I say it all the time because I want people to know the reason I was in prison was not because I got abused when I was younger. It was because I committed a crime and I am a felon. And but we need education to start the healing and the quote unquote fixing process. And those are big parts of advocacy. Those are big parts of reducing our recidivism, our recidivism rate. Our country has a higher recidivism rate than all other countries combined. We have more women in prison than the rest of the world combined. And it's just a sad situation because we have the prisons, we have the buildings, we have the people who work there. We have the Bureau of Prisons, we have the justice system in our federal government, but those systems do not have the tools to help people on the healing process to become more productive, better citizens. And that's really what we need is to educate both the inmates, the people on the outside, and the people in our, that work in our system to advocate for that. So that's my word, education. I worked on an education bill when I first got out, and to help with the percentage or try to find out why the percentage of people who are in prison there's a very high percentage of people who are in prison who were in like the special needs, the special education programs in their schools. And why is that? And were they really, were they just labeled that because of truancy? They never came to school. Their parents didn't care about education because they were living, a life of crime. Or is it really that those people, do have learning disabilities, do need, the extra kick? And I tell you what, it's a higher percentage of people just didn't care about education, so they got put into that globe and then led to a life of, illegal activity to make money. And there's so many people with, eighth grade educations in the prison system that it's just sad. And so that's something we're working on is hitting at a younger age to try to alleviate that. And then also the education while you're in prison to give people an actual skill that is marketable when they get out of incarceration. So they don't just walk on the street and say, hey, give me a job, because that's not probably going to happen, right? That they have a marketable skill and employers who are willing to give them a second chance.
And you mentioned that post incarceration because I know you talk about, advocating for programs that are both pre incarceration, post incarceration, but also during. And in
Yep.
my world, we call that, like continuum of care, like that we're not, people
Yeah.
aren't. So to
Yep.
me, I'm curious from your experience, I think there's sometimes a general idea that like, all right, well they go to prison, they do their time, and they learn their lesson, and then
Or maybe not.
they don't come. And to me, it wow, that sounds like a nice idea, but from your experience, from what I've seen in people that I've worked with and stuff, that it's so easy to get you get released, and
it's almost like you're back into the same situation, or it's even worse because things have gotten more troubling. I know sometimes people are been released at 2 in the morning,
Yep.
and what's even open at 2 in the morning. So I've seen some great things though. We've where I work, we've done some programs where we provide peer support and counseling while people are incarcerated. And then we look at
That's
providing
awesome.
them with, hey, you want to go to treatment after? Like, then we can work on setting you up and then making sure you can go there that day. I saw a really great thing that I wish could be replicated where I forgot where it was, but there was this prison that when they get released, there's like this giant screen, like a touch screen, and
Mhm.
they can scroll and look for services they need and like find what's available around them. So like if they want, so like it's kind of like a menu of like services to be like, yeah, it's there's no one here to talk to you about this because it's early in the morning or late at night. So I'm wondering with all those things that are helping, we do still see there's within the same system, there's a lot of fragments, right?
Yeah,
There's a lot of disconnection even from the same system, which in my world, they would they would want us to hold us to that accountability of we don't just let someone go without where they're going to go next.
exactly.
You don't just say they're going to get discharged and well, I hope it works out well.
Good luck.
We
Yes.
have standards, we have regulations that we have to follow when it comes to making sure like that those gaps aren't so big. It doesn't mean that there are no gaps because there's going to
Yeah, and
be some
there's
gaps.
not a perfect system for anything.
Yeah, so either can you speak on what you've been trying to do, or how do you talk to people who are trying to navigate those incarceration, the post incarceration? Because to me, I look at those as pretty significant transition times, and transition times can be really, really tough. They can be
Oh,
overwhelming. They can be such a source of distress that then when you make it harder, it's just no wonder why I think hope seems dwindled in those times. So, is there anything you can speak on, either from what you experienced or anything that you provide, you've talked about, advocated for on needing to improve this whole continuum of services, not just these broken, fragmented points in the journey?
yeah. And, the first place, in my humble opinion, that, we should focus, I believe, is on that continuum. Um, I want the education and the insight too. I want it all, Andrew. I want everything to be good and so people do get a second chance. And if they screw up again, then they need to pay the price. I believe in prison. That's again where I started my healing. We have prisons for a purpose. Some people in the advocacy and judicial reform don't like that I say that, but we need prisons. We need, a place to put people who break the law. And um, I never want to use the word punish because I don't want anyone to be punished, but to reform people. But something that I really think could help is to have like your state prisons and your BOP talk to the next step after prison, which a lot of times is the fact that you have to go to a reentry center. A lot of people call them halfway houses. I think that was the old term. I've never I never had to call them that, and I never had to go to one. I got released right to my home, and I had home confinement and just had to report into a counselor when I got home. So I had a job when I got home. So I never had to report in because of those things. So I was fortunate in that. But I believe that those people need to hold hands, that group, the group you go to, and the group you come from, right? They need to hold hands so that they are speaking the same language. So, Sue at the reentry center, who is the counselor, knows from the counselor in prison that Tommy did this in prison, did that in prison, and now he's ready for this and these programs. And Sue can say, yes, I have, 3 job interviews lined up for Tommy according to what you told me. And hopefully we can find him a job. And yes, he is here for the next 6 months. Those things don't happen. There is no connect between those two things. Like you say, basically, they get let out at 2 a.m. and they say report to your reentry center, halfway house, whatever we want to call it, by noon today. And you walk in, and a lot of times they don't even expect you. But then they look you up on a piece of paper and they're like, oh, that's right, you were coming today. And they're lucky they have a bed for you. So I think right there, the person feels that they again are just getting, put to the wayside, and that there really is no place or no hope. If this place that says they're going to help me doesn't even know who I am yet, I'm probably not going to be helped. And again, I will push education pre and I will push education during. Marketable skills and employers giving people a second chance when they come out because they know they have those marketable skills are two huge pieces in the advocacy portal. And people being able to earn a living, pay for their medications, have a roof over their head when they get out, instead of having to hustle drugs and go live again in the drug house down the street because they have nowhere else to lay their head, getting right back in the same situation where they were in before, is the reason that our recidivism, I say that word a lot because I hate it because it is so high, is bad. I'll tell you a quick story that I just helped a gal. I've been talking to her for the last couple of days, and I was in Pekin with her, and she's been out probably 3 years, and she was doing fine. She had gotten married. Her wife and her both had a good job. They had a dog together, a house, the whole 9 yards, and they broke up. So she had nowhere to go. She had no job. She went back to her hometown to try to find a job, couldn't find a job. Her wife was abusing her and beating her out. So I connected her with a abuse counselor in her county. I did research on my computer at home, found it. She got a hold of this gal, got her a place to stay. She's got a place to stay now for 17 days. And this abuse counselor and I, looked up basically on Indeed for jobs that she could apply for. And I called a couple of employers and just said, hey, I'm Ranae Van Roekel. I have Connecting to Cope. Not that that has any clout with anybody, but I've said, this gal is looking for this. This is what she has been doing. And she has 2 job interviews next week, and she got hired at McDonald's today. So at least she has something to do. But if she didn't have someone to call, she would have been living on the street with her dog. And it would have happened. And because people knew she was a felon, they knew she had been in prison twice because of drugs. They thought of her as a druggie at home, and she has not used at all. She is her recovery is going well, but one of the things she did say to me is, well, I might as well just go back to what I was doing because nobody cares and no one cares anyway. And I said, the person who has to care is you. And, that's the main and the most important person, whether I care, whether Andrew Schreier cares, whether, Joe down the street cares, doesn't matter. It's you that has to. And so those are the kind of things that people who have been incarcerated struggle with, no matter if it's 1 year ago, 2 days ago, or, 5, 6 years ago. Once you get past that 5, 6, 7 year mark, people are a little more forgiving, but that first 5, 6 years is really.
And I'm curious with that story that you shared, something that came up in my mind was, it just took someone to call for her. And I could imagine some people are like, well, why doesn't she just call? Like, why don't they just make the call? Why don't they look at the resources? I'm curious. It sounds like sometimes someone else needs to be in their corner for other people to give someone a
Yep.
chance.
Yep.
Am I right on that? Where
You are
sometimes
you are
like
totally right, but isn't that anybody who has trauma, who has addictions, who have sometimes you just do. I mean, you need yourself and you need to believe in yourself, but you also just need someone else to say, "Hey, here's a little bit of a push, and here's a little bit you can, I'll help you get up that first step, and the rest of it is up to you." I can't do it all for you, but I can help you, and just someone caring a little bit and someone having, like all their ducks in a row and no pigeons flying around. Well, I have pigeons every day, but um, just someone helping her kind of gave her hope. And like she was so happy. And she had been working a job where she was making like $38 an hour. And now she's making 18 at McDonald's, but she doesn't care because she has a job and she knows that she can move forward and now start looking for a permanent place to stay, which someone else is helping her with that too. So, but you need to know where to get the resources. And if you are lost and downtrodden, sometimes you don't have the wherewithal to find the resources, Andrew. You know that, you in the work you do, sometimes people just don't have it. So
I know sometimes I just remember there's people that I've done counseling with, and they're trying to get an apartment, they're trying to get a job, and sometimes they ask for a character reference because they just their word isn't enough to give a
no,
chance
not anymore.
sometimes.
You've done that. You have shattered your word per se, by making the choices that you made, and you need to build yourself back up. But and when you're a little bit further down the road, you can look back and see why that is. But when you're in it, it's really hard and there's a lot of anger, which again leads so many people to go back to that world of, addiction, or no matter what addiction, I will say it, or, disassociating because of the trauma they suffered and not seeking the help. I'm lucky. I have a supportive family. I have two sons who are amazing, and now I have grandkids who are amazing. And I'm so fortunate. But as a couple of my friends have said, you've made your own quote unquote fortune too. You work on yourself every day. But again, I have support. And now, like this gal, she said, Ranae, you kind of made me believe that I can do this on my own. And I'm like, you can. And you're the only person at the end of the day who can do it. So I can't come out and go to your job for you every day. And I can't come out and, live a better life for you, but you can start working on that. So that's really what I try to do is I've been there, and maybe not in the same shoes they're in. Maybe I was fortunate on some of the things, but not knowing who to go to for my trauma, shoving my trauma under the rug. And that's why I also talk about people taking care of their trauma, which we won't go into that today because, we'll be here forever. But that is another huge part of people who are incarcerated or people who are suffering, with some form of addiction or mental illness, is they probably didn't deal with things that happened to them when they were younger. And I think a lot of stuff, goes back to that, things others did to us and how we handled it in the long run. So
Have you seen anything with that change in your experience versus what you're also seeing now in the line of work that you're doing? Where are you hearing more talks of trauma in the system? Are you hearing more, we need trauma resources? Are you seeing anything more about we need to look at trauma and address trauma?
yep.
Because I know when I first started this line of work 20 years ago, that wasn't even as big in the counseling world. But also, I know that wasn't talked about a lot in incarceration settings. But like now, do you see it being more of something that at least
It is.
we're shining a light on? We're at least seeing that, yeah, this is here, not trying to act like no, or that this has got nothing to do with it. Have you seen at least some movement in just recognizing trauma itself?
It
And
is.
yeah.
It is. Yeah, with the First Step Act, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that was an act that was passed by President Trump, I believe, in 2018, I believe. I usually know right off the top of my head, but I can't tell you today. Again, my pigeons are all over today. But with the First Step Act, that is a huge part of it, is classes that deal with things like traumatic events in your life, how to handle them, how to talk about your trauma, coping skills, self care, all the things that we need. And that is a need, it's not a want. We need to do to keep ourselves healthy, both physically and mentally. And I took every class I could. And again, I had a great counselor in prison, and she encourage me to take every class I did. I was either working or taking a class or working out when I was in prison. Those were the three things I did, or eating bad prison food. But those were the things that I did, and they are really encouraging people by giving time off with the FSA, with the First Step Act. So you can get earned time off by taking the classes for what led you to prison. And you have to have a reason to take the classes, which I like. You can't just walk in and take them. I mean, you can, but you won't get credit for them. And so they are really steering or trying to steer people to take the classes that are going to, again, make them more productive citizens and healthier humans when they get out of prison. But of course, the Bureau of Prisons, and I will say this, the Bureau of Prisons does not want to work with the First Step Act because it lets people out quite a bit earlier. And they are people in prison means money for the Federal Bureau of Prisons, and it is a money making situation. And so that's something else, that needs to be worked on. But again, we're broken. Our system is broken. Look at other countries, and um, we can go on and on about that too. It's just we need to focus on education, and education means, a better life for everyone, both mentally, physically, financially, the whole way down the road. So.
I have one more question before we wrap up, and I want to give you a lot of leeway with how you want to respond to this, with either what you've been through yourself or the work that you've done. What would you say is the top, or it's not the top, it's up there, as far as what you hear people misunderstand or don't realize about the system? So I don't know if that's like what people, things you've heard people say, like when you hear that, you're like, wait a minute, they have no clue what's going on. Or they, so what is it that you hear most that people don't understand about the system? And also, what would you say to that as far as what is really going on, or what is more of a need than what people might be thinking? Because you bring up legal system, you bring up incarcerate, you also are not short of people who have opinions about it. So
Exactly.
so from your experience or from the work that you've done, what do you see as something that is so common to hear about as far as a lack of understanding about the system, and what would you say is a much clearer way of how to look at it or address it?
Well, again, I'm going to use myself because I know myself better than anyone. Some days I don't. Most days I like her now, but some days she's still really difficult to deal with. But anyway, I think that people misunderstand that all people in prison are the word bad. And I still hear, how did you deal with all the murderers and the rapists and all those people in prison? I'm like, well, I guess I didn't think of anybody that way. We were a
Mm.
unified force when we were in prison. I mean, I met some of the best people when I was in prison, people who, like me, had, suffered and made very poor choices. And I think that is misunderstood, that when you're in there, you're a community and you work together to get things done. Another thing that is totally misunderstood is the fact that in a women's prison, at any level, they predict that about 90% of those incarcerated on the female side have 90% have suffered trauma. On the men's side, it's as high as 80%. So a lot of people are broken before they've even committed their crimes. And those people, need some compassion, some empathy, maybe. Um, and I think that everybody deserves a second chance, and a lot of people do not believe that. And so I think that is misunderstood. Again, a lot of broken people, not just someone who decided to go out and, scam someone. I didn't wake up one day and decide I was going to scam someone on a ticket. That is not what I did. I didn't wake up on a Tuesday and do that. It was a long time coming. And um the gal across the hall from me, who was my roommate all through prison, didn't wake up one day and decide she was going to take money from the company she was working for. It was also a long time coming. And so that, I guess it's, I really didn't say what I want people to understand. I just want them to know that they are humans, they are people, and they deserve a second chance. Mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, um, children of people. So I want people to understand that. And if I could change, or if I could tell people one more thing about prison, it's like, give a second chance and try to understand why someone is there instead of what they did. And by that, I mean, the reason they're there is because they committed a crime, but why did they do that? So I'd like a little more compassion there. And then also to understand that education is the key. I know I keep saying that, but it really truly is on all aspects. And that is a big word. We can take that so many different ways, but I think all of us need to be educated, whether you're there, whether you're out, and understand that that can really help you.
That's great. I think there's a lot of important messages that you left there. And without even saying, in a way of saying the misunderstandings you highlighted, where we can get better, where we can improve, where people can see things differently. Also, I think what stood out to me was there was such a focus on what happened, like what occurred, that was then what led someone to being incarcerated, but not everyone wants to know the whole person. They want to know the story of what happened, right? Like the
Yep.
details, or like what was the event? What happened here? What looks good in the movie scene, right? But not everyone wants to know what was going on with this person way ahead of time. What was
And
going on?
and
And
Andrew, something I always say to people is, I used to say, I'd be, sitting at one of my kids' sporting events, and, someone would walk in and they had, quote unquote, done something, right? And I'd be like, oh, they did that. That was one of those moms or one of those people. And now what I say is, God, I wonder why they did that. What led them to make that choice and that decision? And that is such a total, I mean, my mindset, my boys tell me I'm 10 times the person I was before I left. And that means the world to me, because they're like my biggest critics and also my biggest supporters. Um, and so I think that's a big change. Not, oh, what did they do? But it's, why did they do it? And that's, I think if
it's a great
people,
reframe. I mean, that's
it
just
is.
like, instead of just focusing on the what, but adding a little bit before that, trying to understand the why behind the what
Yep.
is a great reframe. So I
Yep.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay,
Good one. Okay.
last thing. After our discussion, everything that we talked about, I know with this line of work, there's no shortage of the need for more discussion, more talk, more ways to help people and work in advocacy, and work with a system that is broken. And there's people like you who are passionate, making this their life work to try and make that happen. With all that to be said, anything you want to share last with the audience about either a lasting message or anything about what you're doing, what you're working on? Now's the time to share that with them.
Sure. First of all, I think I'd just like to reiterate what we just said. That would be a good way to end this podcast is, next time you hear about someone on the news, or see someone in your small community or your big city or your neighborhood, and they have made a very poor choice, instead of saying, oh, what did they do? Maybe you should think why they did it, and show them some compassion. Again, that was a huge learning lesson for me. And I think that it has really turned my life around besides being incarcerated. Something else that I would really appreciate if you would go to www.connectingtocope.com. And by the way, Connecting to Cope is named after my golden doodle. When I was in prison, I had him named before I even got him. I said, I'm going to get a dog. I'm going to name him Cope. I didn't know I was going to do all this, but he was one of my best coping skills, and to this day is. And so if you go there, you can meet Cope, you can listen to some of the things that I have to say, read some helpful hints on not just incarceration and advocacy, but self-care, coping skills, things that you can help yourself through down the line. And if I'm in your area and I'm talking and you want to hear me, look me up. I'd be glad to talk to you. So that's about it, Andrew. So
All right. Well, thanks again for all the work that you do, the conversation. I know a lot of good takeaways, and I think one of the biggest things of the not just the what, but the why behind the what is such a important thing. So I appreciate everything, the conversation, and thanks for joining for the podcast.
yeah, it was great talking to you and your listeners, Andrew. I hope you have a good afternoon.
You've been listening to Talking Addiction and Recovery with Andrew J. Schreier. We're so glad you've joined us and invite you to connect further with the show and these topics at www.andrewjschreier.com. That's Andrew J. SCHREIER.com. You can also email us directly at talkingaddictionandrecovery@gmail.com and connect on social media. Instagram at Talking Addiction and Recovery, Facebook Talking Addiction and Recovery Podcast, and Twitter at TalkAR_podcast. To stay connected and never miss an episode, be sure to like, rate, and subscribe. Until next time, friends, let's keep talking addiction and recovery.